Welcome to Connect, where we explore our connections with Santa Cruz and other places in the world or in the country. Today I have with me two people who are sharing something about refugees and immigrants. First we have Rebecca Bogdan, welcome, and Magdalena Zschokke. So Magdalena, why don't you share with us how did you get to Santa Cruz?
Well, I actually came here by boat, by sailboat from New Zealand originally, and kind of got stuck when I went to graduate school and got my PhD in literature and psychoanalysis. But I didn't really want to teach in a college very much, so I ended up teaching in prison down in Soledad, the Salinas Valley State Prison, which I found very satisfying. But then when the world kind of crashed in on us in at the beginning of 2017, and it seemed everything changed. And when they started locking up the children in cages and took the families apart and stuff, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was going basically kind of stir crazy. So I decided I had to do something, and that's how I ended up going down there.
Great. How about you, Rebecca?
Well, I originally came to Santa Cruz to finish school, and I got my first undergraduate degree in Latin American Studies here at UCSC, and then left town for 9 years, was involved in Central American solidarity work, working on different projects, and got my nursing degree from Catholic University back east, and then came back here and raised my kids here. And so last year I retired after 20 years as a school nurse with the County Office of Education.
School nurse.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And so both of you have gone to the border to kind of work as well as observe and bring. I think you even brought some gifts for people at the border, the needs, daily needs. What did you do?
Well, the interesting part about that one was, like I said, I was just frustrated and in despair and didn't know how to turn. And so at one point I just said, I'm going to go down there and do something. And then it was actually sort of with several friends, and everybody said, yeah, I have stuff to give you. I want to give you money. And it seemed like everybody was so ready to do something. And I happened to be the lucky one who had a Sprinter van and decided to just go down there and do it. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, but I didn't actually end up working, of course, with any of the migrants in the cages, because they are already on this side, and they're already, even the Congress people couldn't go see them. They totally, locked them away. And so I first found the No More Deaths group from Tucson and Phoenix, and I got some medical stuff with them. But then I thought, well, but all the people we just send back across the border, and they're stuck there and have no way of working, and there is no support of any sort because they're foreigners there too. So I thought, well, maybe I can just load the car up, and it is a Sprinter van, up to the ceiling, full roof, and drove down there and delivered basically mostly materials.
And who did you deliver it to?
So that was partly was kind of actually hard to find anybody to deliver it to. I didn't just want to drop it off, and I through the No More Deaths, I think it was, or through some border rebellion people. Somehow I got this website from the Zschokke Society, and started to look there, and then I found the websites. No, actually I didn't. Yeah, I found a website for the Contra Viento y Marea, and where they keep talking that they have a comedor, they have an actual a place where they feed people.
Kitchen, yeah.
And so after writing several times to all kinds of people, finally I got somebody from down there and said, I have this truck full, is there anything particular you need? And so they, yeah, power tools and tents and bicycles. It's like, okay. It's kind of like, okay, I can bring you, certain amounts. One of the interesting things I found was that one of the person who had been down there kept saying, but you cannot bring clothes, you cannot bring shoes and clothes, because the Mexican customs will think you're going to take him down there to sell which I thought was kind of funny that we would go sell. But so I actually had it all packed anyway and took it anyway. And it was quite amazing how they really could use everything. When I then found, because I got the last text I got from this person said, well, look for the red door when you're in the red light district in Tijuana. It's like, oh, not the blue door. Look for the blue door in the red light district. So I come there early in the morning, and the red light district is not very busy early in the morning. And there was a blue door. And I knocked, and then some people kind of came. They obviously had been quite asleep because it's early in the morning. And then we just unpacked everything.
And that was the Commodore?
And that was actually the Commodore where upstairs they sleep in tents themselves. The ones who work there, they're migrants themselves. And also upstairs there's one kind of bigger tent where they collected goods, like clothes and tents and everything for distribution. And so everything went right there and just got carted in.
Right. Let's go back a little bit, because you mentioned the no more deaths. And that's in existence for quite some time. I think you remember that too. And why were they originally? Why did they start originally? Do you know that?
Well, they definitely started because of all those people who walk basically across the desert, and then there's all these horror stories that you see, and some of them and hear a lot of, with some of those customs people, immigration people that actually pour out the water so that they can't get water. And anyway, so when you drive down there by Ajo, by the southern border, it's like a huge long freeway of graves. I mean, there's all these little crosses of people who didn't make it across. So there is so many people just die out in the desert, and then of course there's all the criminal elements where they get killed through the coyotes, and recently I think they also get killed by those border protection guys with guns that have actually no official standing, but they go out there and shoot people anyway. So it seemed to me it is a very important group. They have, however, quite a support, it seemed to me, and also because they are in the States, that that one can send them money and everything. And they've gotten they're most famously recently because their main man has gotten arrested, and they tried to take him to court, and they had the court case, but they couldn't make it stick because it just isn't. It's not a crime, even though I think they were trying to get him for public nuisance or for destruction of property for walking through the desert or some absurd thing. But anyway, so he got acquitted, and then he's back in court.
So the work that El Colectivo and the Commodore is doing is for the newly arrived refugees, migrants.
The work that those groups are doing is autonomous. Basically, they don't have any church support. They don't basically have pretty much any support. They're all migrants.
Self-help. They're helping each other.
Self-help, and they're trying to help each other and not be dependent. Not become kind of just charity cases.
Right.
So there is a group for one house that is kind of for women and children. There is a group for more or less artists. They're all from Honduras, and they're artists. And there is a lot of there's a couple of houses where they're trying to do the support for the gay, lesbian, trans, whatever they call them, the QT-POC. It's the queer, trans, people of color groups down there. But because they of course really get horrible treatment on the way up if they get caught at all. So they're trying to support each other and help each other. So most of those, the comedor, the rest of the food place, and also the getting the houses ready for these people is run by themselves.
Right, and that website, if people want to know more about the autonomous housing support, they would go to Contra Viento y Marea, TJ with the Tijuana.
Yep, that one is just contravientoymarea.org, I think, or .com, and the other one, Casa de Luz, that's the artist one. Also, they have a website, and that's Casa de Luz TJ for Tijuana.
Yeah, great. Now, your work is a little different, although you recognize a
Very
lot of what's
similar.
going on.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about yours.
Oh, well, I actually went down exactly the same way when I first went. I got very upset about family separation, the migrant caravans, was really trying to educate myself and understand how this came to be, that people were fleeing Central America. And so I kind of put myself on a little education program. So I've done quite a bit of reading and study since last summer. No, the summer of 2018, when I first saw the children being separated from their families. And so I first went in December. I knew that the refugee caravans were there, and it actually took some work, as you were saying. I completely understand that, trying to figure out who to connect with,
Right.
to work with folks at the border, try and figure out what was going on, try and figure out how to be of use. And so I loaded up my car and I took down some medical supplies, clothing, not food, but I didn't want to drive across the border, so I walked across the border 5 different times in one day with bags of stuff, which would then break, and I'd be carrying them, and I kept crossing the border on foot, and I kept going to what was then it still is, Comida Sin Bombas, which is essentially a cultural center.
Comida Sin Bombas?
Food Not Bombs.
Right.
Right. And they are really close to the border, like a 10-minute walk. And if you can, it's an easy walk there. And so I kept arriving with donations, and the place was so busy. It's a 4-story building. So Food Not Bombs, or Comida Sin Bombas, is on the 1st floor. It's an anarchist collective. There was cooking going on in the kitchen. There were immigrants all over the floor looking for services. 2 doors, one in the front, one in the back on the alley. There was music playing in the alley. The 2nd floor was where all the donations were going up to. The 3rd floor was Al Otro Lado, which is a legal clinic that has been working at the border for a number of years, providing legal and support services.
So it's called Al Otro Lado,
The
on
other
the other
side.
side.
Yes,
yeah, and
exactly.
I think that's a website, right? Al
Yes,
Otro
that is.
Lado, alotrolado.org. Good.
Yeah, alotrolado.org. And so I was there. I was absolutely overwhelmed at what was going on. There was so much going on and so much chaos. And so
Organized chaos.
Organized chaos,
Yeah.
yes. So I brought all my stuff. We ferried them upstairs. All these people were helping. And there were doctors seeing patients in the alley. They come down on every Saturday. And that is Refugee Health Alliance, and I'll get back to how I got involved with them in a minute. And then I was a retired nurse, so I really wanted I wanted to work with the refugees, so I was translating for the legal clinic. I was doing interpretation, and I was monitoring the numbers at the border. I was one of the people who was one of the legal observers, so I got trained as a legal observer. I would stand at the border where people were crossing every day. And there is a whole number system where there's a number and it's given to 10 people, and it was at about 1,800 or something, which represents 18,000 people when I was there, and it's now up to I think just around 4,000, and so I went back in January. So fast forward for a second. So I went back before Christmas with an organization called New Sanctuary Caravan, and we were providing credible fear interview prep for people trying to explain the asylum process. People were in refugee camps. There was one near the border. It was called Benito Juarez. It got flooded out. They were trying to move everybody. People did not want to be moved far from the border out to another camp called Barital. And we would go out and we would explain the asylum process to refugees at Barital. And help people explain the 5 reasons there are to seek asylum in the United States. If you have a credible fear of returning to your country under 5 categories. And so there was a lot of prep going on, a lot of taking stories, listening to people's stories, recording them, gathering information and getting them connected to services. I mean, and the need was so great. I remember people would be like, I'm crossing the border tomorrow and I only have 1 pair of underwear. I don't have a change of underwear. People didn't have warm clothing. People didn't have food, tremendous lack of food. Viento y Marea came about because there was a whole support community of supporting the people who were being evicted from Benito Juarez.
Right, yeah.
And that was right at the border, and it became kind of a political standoff between the police and the people who wanted to stay. And so the people who were the long-term, kind of the last holdouts at Benito Juarez became the Viento y Marea collective. And so they have the comedor. They provide housing, they provide meals every day. And actually one of their speakers was here in Santa Cruz. I don't know if you went to that event. It was at the
depot?
At the depot.
Yeah, we went there.
Yeah, we went there.
Yeah, that was a really great event. And it was huge. It was so crowded. So it says to me that people are really want to know, really want to understand this process, which is very obscure.
The process meaning?
The immigration process. It's in the dark, it's hidden. And I really wanted to understand how there was such this influx of people from Central America, not only Central America. I mean, I've met refugees from Cameroon, from Haiti, from Russia, from we used to keep track at Al Otro Lado when we would do the legal clinics in the afternoon, and sometimes they'd be like, we had 14 languages spoken today, we served 87 people, there were 45 kids in childcare. I mean, it was just, it was huge, and that goes on day after day after day. And at this point, now with this program called Remain in Mexico, where the people who have asked for asylum are being sent back across the border to wait in Mexico, and the number of people who are attempting to cross the border legally and ask asylum, there's a gap of 10,000 people between the numbers being given and the number of people who are called. So some days it's 40, some days it's 20, some days they don't call anybody. And so that's 10,000 people. And then of the people who are in the Remain in Mexico program, who cross the border, get a court date, and then are immediately shuttled back to Mexico, that's another 5,000 people. So there are essentially 15,000 people trying to figure out how to live, how to survive, how to keep their families together, how to avoid the gangs that are following them from their countries, because a lot of people are there because of persecution by gangs, both in Mexico, and there are people in Mexico fleeing for their lives as well, because their livelihoods have been threatened. So it's all these groups that we're talking about are attempting to create order out of chaos, and to support these people seeking legal asylum in the United States. And it's a big job. It's a really big job.
The 3 young men that I met at the Comedor were all Salvadoran, and they had all supposedly got their numbers. You know, they got their numbers. Now they got their numbers. Now they're waiting, and so they're in the meantime they're somehow trying to help to feed people, to do things. I mean, it is just it's quite overwhelming.
How
indeed.
do they keep up their spirit?
They're young. That's about the only thing I can think of. And they have a lot of community. I mean, it was so wonderful. So in the comedor that you were talking about, so that's on the bottom. They feed 200 people twice a day, and it's like one pot no, 2 pots about that big. And I brought lots of cutlery and plastic bowls and things to reuse. I don't know how they do it, but they have these numbers, and we had lots of cans of beans and, you know, milk and stuff. And then up, so you go up the very narrow step, and then up there is a little square roof where there is like 4 little tents where they all sleep separately. They all have a place, a little tent to sleep in, and like I said, and the big tent where all the donations are being kept. And then along the edge, they had a little garden, and it was so sweet. I mean, it's like, look, here's my tomato plant. It was like that big. It's June already. But then about a month later, a group from San Diego called the Border Angels, they went down with dirt and stuff, and so they made a bigger garden. So now they have a real garden that they can really feed people. I mean, you know, it's really, the contact person from the Viento y Marea that had told me about the Blue Door, she keeps sending these pictures of all the donations and all the changes that are happening. It is just like so inspiring how much they can do with so little. But it's, of course, it is still months and months, day to day, years to come.
I like that question. It's basically about how do people sustain hope, and it's really something to me that everybody I met was so intent on making a better life for themselves and for their families. And it was almost easier for families to be together because the people who I felt like broke my heart the most were the single men traveling by themselves. And so they were alienated. One guy was telling his story, and he said, I haven't seen my mother, and that's the thing that made him cry. I mean, he had just told this horrible story about being kidnapped, and he refused to work for the gang and was trying to drive his taxi. They kidnapped him. He was sequestered in a house, and then he escaped out the window, and he got shot, and he found in the road, and all of this stuff. He was just very matter of fact. And then he said, I can't be in touch with my mother because it isn't safe for her. And that's when he broke down crying. So families trying to stay together, and people trying to create community where they haven't any community, where their community's been destroyed, that's where people make their hope. And I met so many people who would say, I just want to work. I just am looking for work. And I went with a lawyer to Otay Mesa, which is a refugee camp right on the border. I misspoke, a detention center on the border. And we went in to see a client, and I was interpreting for her, for this attorney. And I knew the client from Tijuana and had supported her and her 2 sons. And so I saw what the detention centers were like. And then when people are in detention, they are making paper animals and birds and things to sell and keychains out of the scraps of paper that they get from the commissary. And so there's craft going on. There's always an attempt to build community because people have been separated from their communities, and that's where hope comes from. And I was just thinking about how the president said that he's going to take health insurance away from people, or that you have to have health insurance to come to the United States. And it's just so ironic. I mean, if somebody had health insurance, they wouldn't need to come to the United States. If they had a home,
they wouldn't want to come here.
If they had food, if they had safety, if they had jobs, they wouldn't need to come to the United States. And they're having to come to the United States because of the United States essentially destroying any possibility for democratic communities and people to have jobs. And
how does that happen? I mean, you mentioned that, but how does the United States? We
have basically used Central America as a plantation. We've just very systematically taken out resources. We've taken away farmland. There was a scorched earth campaign in Guatemala, killing the Mayan communities in the highlands because they had an independent way of life. Those highlands had mineral resources that needed to be exploited. and there was no way to get to the mineral resources without getting rid of the people. I mean, that's really the short of it, but
so it's exploitation of resources
exploitation of
and
resources,
work.
banana republics,
Yeah.
anything that is not isn't kowtowing to the United States, isn't supporting them, is they're immediately a new dictator is moved in, and that person is expected to cooperate with the United States.
Now
There's so much more to say.
We have a minute left. Is there anything, you have about a minute, anything you would like to share that we haven't discussed yet? Briefly.
Okay, in 30 seconds. Just to remind everybody that, well, she was just, as Rebecca just said, part of it is the United States has a lot to do with where we are right now in this part of in this continent. But also apart from that, it's not that helping the immigrants who get kicked out again or who haven't made it in yet takes away anything from what we can do locally, because yes, we also have a lot of need locally, but the depth of lack of things that they have to live through, we can definitely
support. We can support them.
We can support.
Yeah. Any final?
Locally, we have Your Allied regional response, which helps in the immigrant community find safety. yar-sc.org is the website, and they have there's a number that you can call if you see ICE in your community. So we have Santa Cruz is a sanctuary city. We are trying to protect our local immigrants and our immigrant community. People should not have to live in fear here.
No.
Yeah.
So connection seems to be an important word here, where people keep up their spirit by forming and maintaining community, or maybe establishing new community. So thank you so much, Magdalena and Rebecca.
Thank you.
And at home, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time. So we stay seated.